All right. Hello, everybody. Let me see something real quick. Okay. I was hoping to be able to share my screen with you, but this is only like the second or third time I've done this YouTube live thing, and I don't see any option to do that. That's okay. I'm going to explain what I'm talking about without it. I wanted to go over understanding rhythm in a little bit of a different way than maybe if you've ever heard it explained. You've heard it explained the traditional way when you're talking about like sheet music, or you're more of the technical terms for things. But I'm going to go a little bit of a different route because I never fully understood, growing up and learning the guitar. I never took music in school. I never took the traditional lessons or learned sheet music or any of that. So I learned on my own just by listening. And looking back on everything, I think that for some people, learning in the traditional sense is very difficult to grasp or to understand. So not that there's anything wrong with it at all. There's nothing wrong with sheet music or anything like that. But for those of you out there who find that a little bit complicated, I want to go a little bit of a different route and maybe help to wrap your mind around the concept of rhythm. Because for something like rhythm and strumming, you really have to hear it and experience it a lot before your brain finally begins to understand it. You're not gonna understand it the first time somebody explains it to you. It's a diamond with many facets, and so you have to look at it from a bunch of different angles before you'll fully understand it. So I want to give you another angle today on rhythm. So if you've ever, and this is what I wanted to show you a visual of this, but I think hopefully you guys don't know what I'm talking about since I can't share my screen. But if you have ever seen growing up, or maybe if you have kids, the pattern recognition that we like to teach kids in school, and that have to do with colors or shapes. So maybe you have a series of colors and they're in a pattern. And so you have maybe circles, and there's a red circle, and then a blue circle, and a blue circle, and then a red circle, and a blue circle, and a blue circle. And they're in a pattern. And the idea is for the kids to determine what the pattern is. Or maybe it's with shapes instead of colors. Maybe it's a diamond, a triangle, and a rectangle, and a diamond, a triangle, and a rectangle. And these patterns can get they can go from simple like that to more complicated. Maybe the pattern's 8 pieces long or 20 pieces long before it repeats again. But that visual pattern recognition is something I think we've all experienced and we all understand. But with music, it's the exact same thing, except it's audio and not visual. So with music, we have audio patterns instead of visual patterns. And the most basic form of this is going to be the metronome. Okay, so the metronome, you've probably all have heard a metronome. Maybe you've used a metronome. A metronome is basically just a tick sound, right? It's that the traditional metronome is with the little knob that goes back and forth, and it makes the ticking, tick, 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 back and forth, okay? And what that does for musicians is it sets the beat. Now, the traditional metronome, all it does is it does the same beat over and over again with evenly spaced apart beats, but there's no pattern in the sense where, if we were to transfer that sound into a visual, something visual, okay? So if we were to transfer the tick sound to something visual, let's say a red circle, then it would just be a bunch of red circles over and over and over again because there's no variation in the sound. It's the same pitch. It's the same loudness, volume. Nothing about that changes. So it's just that red circle over and over and over again. So there's no pattern necessarily. But if you take that, a digital metronome, nowadays with a digital metronome, you can set the beats per minute. So let's say you can set time signature. So let's say on your digital metronome, you can set it to 4/4 time. If you do that, what's going to happen is the very first beat is going to be a higher pitch, and the 3 beats after are going to be a lower pitch. So it'll be doop, 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 okay? And what we just did is we created a pattern. We took that first beat, that first red circle, and we made it a blue square. And then we have 3 red circles, and then a blue square, and then 3 red circles, okay? And so what we're doing is we're creating a pattern, an audio pattern, okay? And that metronome is the most basic form of that. And so again, when I say 4/4 time, in musical lingo, that just means 4 beats per measure. So we have, if we were to count, if you were to dissect that metronome, you would notice that there's a red square and then 3 blue circles, and then it repeats. So there's 4 shapes or 4 beats, and then that same pattern repeats again. Okay, so there's 4 beats in a measure. Okay, if you group that together, that's going to be the most popular time signature, is 4/4 time, 4 beats per measure. Most popular songs are going to be in 4/4 time. Probably like 70 to 80% of popular music is going to be in 4/4 time. I just came up with that number in my head, but it's something like that. So that's going to be the most popular time signature. So usually when I'm trying to figure out a song, let's say I hear a song on the radio and I want to learn how to play it, I'll go look up the chords online. I like to use Ultimate Guitar. Usually I'll just type into Google the name of the song, and I'll end it with chords, and then I'll find it on YouTube. I mean, on Ultimate Guitar, and I'll make adjustments, but I'm not talking about chords right in this lesson. But usually, you can find chord charts easy enough online. What it's really hard to find out is the strumming pattern, right? Or what is the rhythm for this song? But usually what I'll do is I'll try it out in 4/4 time first, right? Because that is going to be the most popular time. And then right below that, after 4/4 time, is 3/4 time, or 3 beats per measure. That's the next most common time signature, which is a pattern of 3. Okay, so we have 3 beats, and then it repeats. That pattern repeats. Now, let me take a step back and explain something going back to the metronome idea. So let's say we have the metronome, and we just talked about how we changed the pitch of one of the beats in order to create a pattern. So the first beat has a higher pitch than the other 3, and that creates the pattern. So we can count the beats, and we know when to repeat now, because there's one pitch that's higher than the others. Now you can use pitch to create what I'm calling a verbal indicator. Okay, so you can use pitch to create a verbal indicator, or you can use volume. So maybe the one beat is louder than the other beats, or again, pitch or volume. So those two, in terms of us listening, are going to be how we can hear that there's something different about that beat that really sets it apart from the others. Okay, let's say the drums. Okay, so for the drums, if I take a djembe, just one drum, I can create that same beat on a djembe. Okay, my first beat can be a higher pitch from the outside of the drum, and then I hit the inside of the drum for the lower beats. Boom, 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 right? And that would be a 4-beat pattern. And that higher pitch is what makes it obvious to me and the listener that we're in a 4-beat pattern, okay? Now, as you listen to music on the radio or online, that same principle is at play, but it's a lot more complicated because there's a lot of stuff going on. But once you understand this principle and you learn how to hear these verbal indicators, you'll be able to listen to a song on the radio and figure out what time signature it's in based on the verbal indicators. Nobody has to tell you how to do that once you understand this rule, okay? Usually you can listen to the drums. The drums are a great verbal indicator as to the time signature of the music. A lot of times the snare or the kick drum will repeat in a certain pattern. That's going to help you to hear what time signature it's in. Lick that's repeated either on the electric guitar or maybe the bass, where they do something every measure. They do the same progression every measure that's repeated over and over. And so in that case, it's pitch that's changing. If it's the bass guitar doing something like right, so that would be pitch that's changing. And every time we hear that note repeated, we know that we're starting over with a measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that would be a 4-beat pattern. So in that case, it's pitch. And with the drums, it could be the intensity. Maybe it's a louder kick or something like that, or the snare. That's a great example, the snare drum. The snare drum doesn't change pitch, but it can change intensity. You can hit it harder, and that will be a verbal indicator as to the rhythm. Okay, so the same thing can be the case with the guitar. Now, if you've watched any of my song tutorials, you've probably come across the driving pattern, which is a 4-beat pattern. And in that pattern, there's a verbal indicator as to the repeating. When it repeats is at the end. Okay, so we have 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a difference in the dynamics. I'm strumming louder on 1 and 2, and softer on 3 and 4. But there's something else I add in there. I add an upstrum after beat 4. Okay, and that upstrum is my verbal indicator because that repeats once per measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's where the verbal indicator is that I'm playing a 4-beat pattern. Another example is the folk pattern, which is also a 4-beat pattern. But for the folk pattern, the first beat has a verbal indicator. The first beat of each measure, I'm only plucking 1 string. So I have 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and. Okay, so in that case, that single note, which is the root note of the chord, is resonating really clearly apart from the rest of the measure, and that's my verbal indicator for that one. Okay, the swing pattern is also that's a 3-beat pattern, but it's very similar to the folk pattern where I'm strumming the first note of the chord by itself. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I'm strumming just that one note by itself for beat 1, and then I strum the rest of the chord for beat 2 and 3. Okay, so again, that's my verbal indicator, hitting that 1 string by itself. Okay, so when you're listening to music, and now that you know this, try to pick out the verbal indicators from the song. And obviously, it's easier with music that has less instruments. If it's an acoustic set or something like that, when you're just learning how to do this, it's easier to be able to pick out the instruments when there's fewer of them. Okay, but that's a great thing. That's a great way to practice beginning to hear rhythm. Okay, is to try to pick out those verbal indicators. What is a sound that's repeating over and over again? And try to pick that out. Okay, and then begin to count the beats and see if you can find the repeating, how it repeats. Okay, a lot of people think that a way to tell the repeating or the pattern is to listen to the chord changes. Okay, so when the chord changes, that is the time signature of the song. And that's not always the case. It is very often the chord will usually switch at the beginning of a measure, right? You'll usually go to a new chord at the beginning of a measure, but it's not always the case. Sometimes a chord might last for 3 or 4 measures before you switch. And sometimes a chord will only last half a measure. And then it'll switch in between, on after beat 2, it'll switch. So that's not always a good indicator to use that. But sometimes, a lot of times it will be right, but it could confuse you if suddenly the chord changes really quick. and you're like, wait a minute, what's that? So don't always go by that. Mostly on those verbal indicators, whether it's listening to the drum or listening to the pitch or the volume of the music and how it repeats. Okay, cool. Let's see. Lopez, does learning a song get easier when you get more skilled? Yes, definitely. It definitely does get easier with time. Something like this, when it comes to figuring out the time signature of a song. And again, when I say time signature, you don't have to know what 4/4 time is. For literally not until a couple of years ago did I even know what 4/4 time meant, or 3/4 time. You don't have to know all of that lingo to be able to hear music and be able to feel it. I've played professionally for years, over 15 years, and I've always knew how to listen to a song on the radio and just begin to play with it. I didn't always know how to do that, but what I'm saying is I knew how to do that before I knew what time signatures even meant. So you don't need to know the lingo to be able to hear this stuff. It's just a matter of doing it, going out there, learning some songs. And as you begin to learn songs and break songs down into their basic form, and all of a sudden it begins to make more sense to you. And then you listen to music, and then you play the song, and then you listen to a new song and you play it. The more and more you do that, the more you'll begin to see the patterns that are common for almost all songs out there. There's only 7 notes in all music, and so all music is made out of that. And so you'll begin to see the patterns as the more and more that you play, and that makes it really easy to pick up the guitar and to begin to take a song that you hear on the radio and learn how to play it. But you just got to get in there and do it, make the mistakes, and that's how you're going to learn. Awesome. Yeah, you play by ear too, TJ. Yeah, awesome. That's really cool. I think that again, there's nothing wrong with learning sheet music or going to school and taking lessons. Nothing wrong with that at all. I think it's really good. In fact, I've done a lot of learning over the past few years to try to get myself to understand the more technical side of music, just because I want to be able to explain things better. But I do think, there's pros and cons to both sides. I think that, and I've had this case where I've played with musicians that have only learned sheet music, and they really struggled to feel the music. They could play sheet music really well, but they couldn't feel it, if you know what I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but they couldn't feel the music in the sense of when we're playing together, they couldn't deviate from the sheet music at all. They couldn't, they couldn't fluctuate. They had to stick with that sheet music. And so I think it's a good thing to mesh both sides together, where you learn how to feel the music as well as read the music. Okay, and that way you can blend those two together and be able to feel music and really get into it. To me, that's the joy of playing, is being able to get into the music that you really love and really enjoy it, and not just play it like a robot, so to speak. Cool. Let's see. Jay Disney. Let's see. Remember Me by Coco, easier version. I don't, honestly, that's the easiest version that I could. I did change some of the chords for that song. JD's asking, can you make a Remember Me by Coco easier version? I do have a song tutorial for that song on the YouTube channel. But honestly, that song is more difficult. Just because of the chords that are used. They really are breaking some of the rules, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but they're deviating from the scale in some places, and that makes it really hard to make an easy version of that song, because no matter what key you put it in, you're going to be breaking away from the scale, which makes it harder to play. So there's no way around that, unfortunately. Cool. Let's see. Yeah, Scorpio to learn guitar, too structured or stiff. Yeah, I understand that completely. I did take some music lessons. I took piano lessons for a couple of years, and I felt the same way. That it was, it's just very rigid, rigid and stiff. I know what you mean by that. It can be, until you learn how to do both, right? Learn how to feel it, and that's the challenge. Is to, once you start learning a bad habit, is to learn how to break out of it. Let's see. Kevin, is strumming easy or fingerstyle? I would say strumming is easier to learn first. If you're just starting out, strumming would be easier to learn than finger picking, because there's less you have to do for strumming. With finger picking, there's a lot more involved than with strumming. So I would definitely say strumming is easier, especially if you do something like the driving pattern. The driving pattern, in my opinion, is the easiest pattern to learn. It's very straightforward, 4 beats, all down strums, 1, 2, 3, 4, evenly spaced apart, with an up strum after beat 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and, right? And that's just repeated over and over again. Super easy pattern to learn. And so if you're struggling with strumming, I would say start off with that pattern. And I've got dozens and dozens of songs that use that pattern on my song library on my website. You can narrow down the search to the driving pattern and find all the songs that use the driving pattern. And that's a great place to start because it's super easy pattern to learn first. Awesome. Let's see. Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad the song on the website's making it easier for you. Scorpion 313. TJ, Stand By Me. I don't know if I have a tutorial for that song. I can check on. I think I do. Stand By Me. On the song library at the website. I would go there and check because I think I have it there. And honestly, playing live here, it's going to be really hard to make out the guitar. It's going to be a lot better audio if you look it up on the website. But I'm going to pull it up right now and see. Yeah, I do have that tutorial. Stand By Me. It's in the G chord family. It uses the folk pattern, which I just talked about the folk pattern a second ago. That's a great one to learn. It's also a 4-beat pattern. Yeah, so it was the night. It's really high. When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we see. So again, that folk pattern is the same thing the whole way through, and it's only 4 chords: G, E minor, C, and D. So it's a great, easy song to get started on, and it is. I do have that tutorial, and I would definitely go there if you're interested in learning that song. Awesome. Metro, I'm not familiar with that song, unfortunately. So sorry about that. Jay Disney, thank you. Appreciate that. Hopefully we'll get to 1 million subscribers. Awesome. Okay, guys. Well, I hope this lesson was helpful for you guys. I hope it helps you to begin to wrap your mind around rhythm and strumming. And if you guys have any questions, you can always let me know. I try to get to as many people as I can. I get a lot of questions there on YouTube. But I hope you guys enjoy this, and I'm going to try to do some more of these.